Texas currently emits 656 million metric tons of CO2 every year. This equates to 12.18% of nationwide emissions, which is twice as high as California, the next highest emitter. This is predominantly because of Texas' reliance on coal power plants and fuel-inefficient vehicles. If Texas were its own country, it would be the seventh worst polluter in the whole world. The state's annual emissions of 656 million metric tons heat the planet a little over 1,000th of a degree Celsius each year, which equates to 12/100ths of an inch in global sea level rise by cautious estimates. There will be many environmental impacts on Texas. About half of the cities of Galveston and Port Arthur are below 1 meter of sea level, and 15% of Corpus Christi is under 1 meter. Storm surges during hurricanes sometimes reach up to 15 meters, wreaking massive damage to property. A warmer Gulf of Mexico will cause stronger hurricanes by lending them energy in the form of heat. This sea level rise, from hurricane storm surges and just in general, will destroy the coastal marshes that 75% of America's ducks and geese pass through every year. Ocean acidification will also reduce the population of shrimp in the Gulf of Mexico by 25%, a large revenue source for fishermen. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts a 30% increase in summer precipitation in Texas, including an increase in precipitation during extreme wet days, exacerbating the state's existing problem of flash flooding. Increased temperatures and heat waves will cause drought in the other 3 seasons.
It's now or never for Texas to address its carbon emission problems. Data compiled in the 2013 Texas Clean Energy Report are a testament to the grave emission situation that Texas must now deal with. Since the turn of the millennium, emission rate reduction lags behind the national average by a considerable margin, and Texas's total emissions output has climbed to almost 650 million metric tons. At a social carbon cost of $37 per ton, that puts an annual emissions cost at just over $23 billion for the state. These trends will not reverse without significant and timely measures being taken on the part of the state and its citizens. If action is not taken, models project that the cost per ton could climb to over $100 by the mid-century. Fortunately for Texas, the time is ripe for a radical change in thinking when it comes to the state's energy. As of 2013, coal is no longer the main source of power for the state's electric grid, having been overtaken by natural gas. While the cost of natural gas will continue to climb throughout the 21st century, refer to the Texas Clean Energy Report chart on the right, nuclear energy has emerged as a viable candidate to permanently replace both coal and natural gas at the vanguard of Texas's energy sources. Nuclear is an especially attractive option given the 45-cent per kilowatt-hour cost throughout the lifetime of the plant. This figure is projected to hold at a constant real price in the near future. As you can see from this chart, projections show Texas meeting 88% of the Clean Power Plan's required reductions just from current market trends. Thus, a huge investment is unnecessary. As such, this means that state policymakers do not have to start from scratch in order to achieve the necessary fossil fuel emissions. What remains in question, however, is Texas's ability to bridge current market trends and renewable energy growth set to the standards by the EPA.
Nuclear energy has already proven to be a successful form of clean energy in Texas. Already, Texas's 4 nuclear power plants not only prevent 27.6 million tons of carbon dioxide from entering the atmosphere, but they also prevent millions of tons worth of other harmful air pollutants that are released into the atmosphere from traditional energy sources. There are several reasons why nuclear energy is a comparatively better renewable energy source compared to other renewable energy sources. First is natural gas. Although natural gas currently provides the majority of Texas energy, it is not without its drawbacks. Price volatility in the natural gas market has caused investors to worry about expanding future production facilities. Additionally, while natural gas emits less than coal, they still do emit carbon dioxide. In fact, they emit about 50% of the carbon dioxide that would be emitted from a coal plant. Nuclear power plants, however, emit 0 tons of carbon dioxide. Moreover, local environmental concerns over natural gas fracking has caused some political upheaval. Secondly, nuclear energy is a more reliable option than solar and wind. Those renewable energy sources are certainly valuable and they are contributing to the current favorable market trends, but Texas policymakers should look to nuclear energy as the future backbone of energy production in Texas. Nuclear energy, unlike solar and wind, can be produced 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. In addition to being more reliable, it can also provide the sheer amount of energy necessary to meet demand. Already, Texas's 4 nuclear power plants provide as much energy as all other forms of renewable energy in Texas combined. Thirdly, given the political context of Texas, a politically feasible policy is one that Texas's conservative legislature and governor can get behind. Although some have proposed other policies like a cap-and-trade plan or a carbon tax, these would be political non-starters to the conservative Texas government. Texas Republicans have expressed support for nuclear energy in the past and would look favorably upon future nuclear development policies. Finally, nuclear energy is safe. Despite popular misconceptions, the federal government actually requires incredibly stringent safety procedures and regulations for all nuclear power plants and reactors. Moreover, technological advancements have allowed companies to build power plants with several layers of fail-safes to prevent any sort of catastrophe. Our policy is that the state of Texas should create a production tax credit and a loan guarantee program to incentivize private investment, based on the federal energy policy of 2005. The specifics of our policy is that the state should establish a loan guarantee program that guarantees up to 80% of the construction costs of a nuclear power plant. The state should create a production tax credit that subsidizes 1.8 cents per kilowatt hour produced in a nuclear power plant. The overall goal is to not just provide financial support for nuclear energy development, but to also catalyze private investment by eliminating regulatory uncertainty for investors. Although Texas should base its policy from the Federal Energy Policy Act of 2005, Texas should also learn from its mistakes and make several key changes to craft a truly successful policy. As such, there should be no cutoff date to apply for a tax credit, unlike the federal policy. With the federal policy, companies had to meet strict, unreasonable deadlines in order to be eligible for the tax credit. By making the tax credit permanent, companies and investors will be reassured that investing in nuclear energy is a less risky and more profitable project. The state Texas policy should also allow periodic adjustments for inflation. The initial federal legislation did not give the flexibility to account for inflation, which meant that the value of the tax credit would decrease over time. By allowing periodic adjustments for inflation, investors can be assured that they are receiving a consistent value of government support for their projects. Already, our policy has empirical evidence of its success. New nuclear power plants are being built in Georgia and South Carolina thanks to financial and regulatory support from state governments. This policy obviously carries financial costs. Based on projections from the federal policy, the tax credit would cost $6 billion over 8 years. Loan guarantees can also be expensive, but it is likely that a private company would not claim the full $6.4 billion per power plant. The loan guarantee would most likely subsidize the costs of delays and overruns associated with nuclear power plant construction, the costs of which are usually in the hundreds of millions. It is important to note that part of creating regulatory certainty and incentivizing private investment is sending a serious signal to the private sector that the government cares about the success of these projects. Private companies look to see how much skin in the game, so to speak, the government has in the project and make their investment decisions based on that. Finally, the benefits of our policy would far exceed the costs. As mentioned earlier, the cost of doing nothing is too high. Current climate trends demand that policymakers take decisive and powerful actions to combat climate change. By reducing air pollution, our policy would also reduce health costs associated with low air quality. Nuclear power plants, highly specialized facilities, create demand for high-skilled workers. Current nuclear power plants in Texas have an annual payroll of nearly $200 million and employ around 1,500 high-skilled workers. As such, investing in nuclear energy is not only a good environmental policy, but a pragmatic economic policy as well.
Unlike solar and wind energy, nuclear energy isn't fully supported by environmentalists, which is actually a positive in Texas' conservative political environment. Republican politicians have voted for nuclear power plant construction in the past, and there's no indication that opinions have changed. The average nuclear plant brings with it 1,200 high-paying jobs for skilled workers, making it an easy sell to lawmakers. Our policy proposal also includes zero tax increases, relying instead on tax subsidies. The loan guarantee program potentially has a cost of zero as well to the taxpayer. The state government is only required to allocate funding if the nuclear energy company defaults on its loans. The loans themselves are provided by private investors. Because this goes through the private sector rather than the public, it is more favorable to Texas's pro-business Republicans. Emission regulations on existing fossil fuel power plants or shuttering of coal power plants would be unlikely to pass due to the huge influence of the fossil fuel companies on state politics through lobbying and massive campaign contributions. Governor Greg Abbott has received more money from fossil fuel companies than any other industry. And many of the world's largest oil companies are in Texas, including Shell and ExxonMobil. Therefore, increased regulations on fossil fuel companies and power plants are politically unfeasible. Luckily, the population and energy requirements of the state are quickly increasing, so nuclear can fill the gap without stepping on the toes of fossil fuel companies. The federal government, especially the EPA, is political poison to Texas politicians, and if Texas didn't write its own proposal for the Clean Power Plan, the EPA would step in to create its own. This gives politicians a good reason to comply with the EPA's regulations, to maintain state control and keep Obama's EPA out of their business. Greg Abbott has repeatedly criticized the EPA, but fulfilling the Clean Power Plan and writing its own proposal would actually reduce the EPA's power. A potential political hurdle for our policy would be the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, known as the NRC. All nuclear power plants and reactors must be approved by the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission. As a state environmental policy director, lobbying this commission and convincing them of not just the technology advancements and safety made by companies since Fukushima, but also by the state government's commitment to ensuring safe nuclear energy development. The NRC recognizes that the political and regulatory winds are shifting in favor of nuclear energy, and they would be more likely to approve the Texas policy if they felt like it had a trustworthy partner in the Texas state government. The federal government might also finance Texas's program. Just last week, Congress gave out $80 million in nuclear energy R&D, showing that nuclear energy is popular with Republicans in Washington, too. Luckily, Texas utilities already have plans to convert coal power plants to natural gas, and vehicles are constantly becoming more fuel efficient. With 88% of required reductions already covered, the Texas state government needs to cover only 12% of reductions on its own. With small amounts of tax subsidies and loan guarantees, Texas can easily make up the difference. Furthermore, nuclear power plants will create jobs in Texas. Truly, the Clean Power Plan gives Texas a chance to become a better state, giving it a cleaner and more prosperous future.